me open the live. All right, here we are. Welcome to Innovation Restart Chats. This is a meeting. How is everyone doing? Thank you for joining. You know that this is part of the usual drills with the innovation management courses here at Scuola Sant'Anna. You hear me speaking in English. Why? Well, because we have the pleasure to have two guests today. One is Italian, is okay, it's pretty good. Tommaso Minola from Università di Bergamo. No, il tuo italiano, Tommaso, non è così male. You could manage. Yeah, you can manage. But unfortunately, David's Italian is something we need to work on. David Audretsch, are you there, David?
Sì.
Ciao, David. Ciao. David Italian is not yet to the level.
In my heart.
Roberto, beware. He does understand much better than he pretends. So
okay.
Let's be cautious.
He's one of those.
I pretend I understand.
Okay, so with Professor Audretsch and Professor Minola, we're going to take you on a journey to understand SMEs, startups, and their role in innovation. We're doing this in a very, very important moment, in my opinion, when it comes to Italy. There is a way of saying, David, in Italian, which means it's raining meatballs, piovono polpette. It's raining meatballs in the sense that after a long period where we were crying out for public and private support for innovation and in innovation policy in general, we are going through a period what is actually happening, and there are a lot of public and private support and initiatives to support and to support innovation that is starting from SMEs, startups, students that want to become entrepreneurs that want to be students again and then become again entrepreneurs, large companies that want to invest into SMEs. SMEs that want to scale, anything. So you have everything all at once. Someone is writing about the state becoming more entrepreneurial, and how timely, or I should say, was Tommaso and David's work together with Alessandra Palombelli, Luca Grilli, and Einar Rasmussen. They have worked on a special issue for a very important journal, which is research policy. Some of my students don't know research policy. It's fair because you don't need to know research policy, but it's a very important journal when it comes to innovation, management, and science and technology policies. We are going to talk about that special issue. We're going to talk about the beautiful, very interesting paper that David, Tommaso, and with their co-authors worked on, that is giving us a snapshot, okay, on the different policy initiatives to support innovative startups. Before we do that, however, my friends connected from very, very close and very, very far. I see Luca Grilli, by the way, has connected. Luca is one of the co-authors. Ciao, Luca. Welcome. Very nice to see you. Luca is from the Polytechnic of Milan. We welcome you. Switch on your camera if you want.
Yeah, but I'm supposed to be silent, really. Because
you are
okay, and I
you're You are more than welcome to take part in this conversation.
I'm only here to listen to David and Tommaso's speech. Really,
Alberto, as you
Only
can
here-
see, we have a dress code. You know, all the
Ah, sì.
co-authors,
Già,
white
very.
t-shirt, and this. I mean, it
I
was
see.
commanded.
I see. And connected only to say hi or not to say anything. We have a surprise. Our dean, Andrea Piccaluga. Ciao, Andrea. Andrea has been
Andrea.
working in the field of technology transfer and academic spin-offs for a while. So I guess he's more curious than anything. So instead of saying hello, probably we'll also have questions for David and Tommaso. Andrea, ci sei?
Eccomi, ciao a tutti.
Ciao Andrea. Very nice of you to join us today. I know you
It's
had a
my
long day.
pleasure. Thank you.
You just had I don't know how many hours of classes, but thank you for joining Innovation Restart Chats. Allora, I was saying very timely paper, and we're going to talk about that. For those of you connected through YouTube, let me remind you that Alessandro has switched on a chat function on YouTube, so you can play with that and give me questions. Those of you connected on WebEx instead, and feel free to ask questions directly, maybe politely, don't all at once. And remember, also you have a chat function that you can use to come si dice, to ask questions. Ok, tutto chiaro? Fin qua? Bene. Allora, David, before, David Audretsch is a professor, distinguished professor and academic chair of economic development at Indiana University, where he's connecting us from. He has many different affiliations also in Europe, at the WHU school in Germany, as well as a research fellow with the Center for Economic Policy Research in London. He has studied this topic we're going to discuss about today for quite some time. And indeed, David, if I may, let me take you and the students back, 31 years, when your landmark book, Innovation and Small Firms, came about with Professor Axe. You wrote an incredible book, extremely well documented and well researched. So in that book, you provided a lot of evidence, and you provided a lot of evidence of something that by now we all know, but maybe in 1990 we were not really sure we had the numbers. Specifically, you say, hello, small firms are extremely innovative. They are part of the innovation value chain. They are part of the national innovation system. Very, very important component of the innovation, the national innovation systems. You provided data on that, and since then you research this topic to then proceed on other very interesting subjects. But let us start from there. Can you take us back 30 years ago to the haha moment that characterized that work with Jordan Axe? What were? Tell us a little bit. Take us behind the scene of that research that ended up in that book.
Well, thanks very much, Alberto, for the very kind introduction, the great motivation and enabling me. And thanks very much, Tommaso, too. And I know some of my co-authors, Luca, I think, here of that article are here. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you And of course, I deeply regret the not to have the opportunity to join you in Pisa, but we make the best of it. As Charles Dickens once wrote, it was the worst of times and the best of times, and so it is. But yeah, Alberto, to your question, and you make me nostalgic. 31 years ago, and I think, yeah, nobody talked like you back then. I don't mean people didn't speak Italian. Of course they did. But nobody talked about innovation ecosystems and innovation value chains, or, and then if I go back just a little bit before to when I was in the student seat, when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, and I was majoring in industry economics, but the same field that Romano Prodi, also to the young people, he used to be president of your country, and before that was president of the European Union. But when I studied that, we barely heard the word innovation, let alone all those other complicated, words you use. And there was a reason for that, because at that point, way back in the 1970s, innovation didn't seem to be what drove business success, performance of companies or of regions. When you looked at the great regions of the world, back when I was in your seats, the students, you'd go, if you were in Italy, I think you'd go to probably to, I'm just guessing, probably to where the great auto company in Torino. What's the great
Torino.
Yeah. And if you were in Germany, you go to the Ruhr Valley where the manufacturing was. Of course, in the United States, it was in Detroit. Detroit was the wealthiest city in the United States, presumably in the world, when I was just before I was your age, a student. And it all got blown away in this crisis. I know for all of us, but certainly for the young people, the pandemic is a crisis none of us ever thought we'd have. But that's, Alberto, when you asked me to take you to the moment, there was this crisis in the late 70s and 80s that nobody saw coming. The great manufacturing companies, they were based on innovation. They were based on scale and large production in automobiles in Detroit, steel in Pittsburgh, tires in Akron, Ohio. The strength of the U.S. emanated from where I am in the Midwest. When we looked at Europe, the strength of the wealthy companies, the wealthy regions, emanated from where the manufacturing was. That wasn't really about innovation. It was about size and scale. So when I was in your seat studying, learning about business, strategy, management, there were no courses of innovation because nobody talked about innovation. Rather, when you read the great thinkers of that time, Alfred Chandler, he had a famous book, Scale and Scope. It was all about size. Well, this crisis that hits in the which is really the start of globalization, wiped out those companies, wiped out those cities. I mean, Detroit now, of course, is one of the most desperate cities, but it has been for pretty much my whole adult life. Pittsburgh has recovered. The Ruhr Valley's done well. They found, and most of that strategy has been to turn to innovation, but it wasn't so obvious back in the 1980s, and nobody knew what to do. But slowly, policymakers, thought leaders in policy, business, but then also academics like us started to realize where there was success. We could see Silicon Valley was not quite flourishing, but it wasn't succumbing. It wasn't a victim of this globalization. It was able to leverage the globalization. We could see where there was success, there was innovation. Now, people like us, Alberto, Tommaso, me back then, didn't really know what to say about innovation. There wasn't much of a tradition at all. So some of the first thinkers, I mean, if you go back to the Nobel Prize, I know that the dean, Andrea, surely will remember the the Nobel Prize, and Alberto, you will, the Nobel Prize winner, Robert Solow, the professor from MIT. And he explained what led to success. 2 ingredients. I don't know what you need for your ingredients in pasta, in your beautiful pizza. I know it's beautiful and great. It doesn't seem like you need much more than 2 ingredients, but Robert Solow only needed 2 ingredients to explain why Detroit was rich and we'll say Alabama or California wasn't. They had the physical capital that you needed for manufacturing, but you need a little bit of, not water like pasta, you need a little bit of labor, unskilled, didn't really matter. So, but yes, actually, so when we had this crisis in the 1970s and 80s, people looked to Solow and the other thought leaders and said, what do we do? And Solow or his disciples pointed to the residual and they said, it's in the residual. He called it technical change. We would call it innovation. He goes, in the residual of his model, it's also, because his R squared was not 1, they never are. He said, that's the technical change, that's the innovation. And the implication was it's random, it's stochastic. Somebody once said it falls like manna from heaven, maybe the way beauty falls on Tuscany from heaven. I don't know. It hasn't quite hit us in Indiana, but we do. In a way, the policy implication of the Solow model is a little upsetting. Nobody would ever say it, and that is prayer, pray. I mean, what else can you do when it's random, stochastic, falls from heaven? You pray to heaven that it will fall on you. Now, as we had this crisis and people started to realize innovation matters, the idea of saying, be lucky, go to Las Vegas, that's not a very good strategy. Pray, go to Rome, that doesn't seem like a very good policy strategy. And so then scholars started to say, okay, what is it that determines innovation? And a scholar, Zvi Grilakis at Harvard, said, well, look, it's the same thing that Milton Friedman said, another Nobel Prize winner at the University of Chicago. He said there's no such thing as a free lunch. To get an output, you need inputs. I mean, in a way, that's the same thing Robert Solow was saying. To get the output of success, performance, growth, you need the inputs of physical capital and labor. Well, Zvi Grilakis said, yeah, it's not quite the same for innovation. Other ingredients are important. I've been to the another beautiful place in your country, up to Bergamo, and of course there people eat a lot of polenta. And what you learn in polenta, the key ingredients are a little bit different than pasta. You need this, well, I'll stop, cornmeal and some other things. But the point is, different ingredients. So what Zvi Grilakis realized is, you need ideas and people who can think, can work with ideas. You need, where do the ideas come from? They come from human capital. They come from research and development. And he introduced what became famously known as the knowledge production function. And when people estimated this knowledge production function, they found it surely worked for countries. The innovative countries were countries like, like Switzerland and Canada, Japan, had a lot of research and development, had a lot of human capital. Certainly compared to Africa, South America, with not a lot of human capital, not a lot of research and development. It worked for industries, the so-called high-tech industries, computers, instruments, pharmaceuticals. What did they have? A lot of research and development. They still do, a lot of human capital, compared to shoes or agriculture products. Not a lot of human capital in research and development. So that seemed to hold. Then at first the data was only there for large companies. Why was that? So people would look at the Fortune 500 companies or the typically data sets like that. Didn't matter if it was in Europe or the US. Why was that? I mean, I lived through it. It's because measurement is costly. I don't know about you all, we say you all, when you got your first COVID test, but my guess is it wasn't till, at least a year ago, right? Because why would you get a COVID test 3 years ago? I mean, why would it's costly and it doesn't seem to be valuable. Suddenly a year ago, we realized we need it. Society starts pouring in resources, give us a test. Then it starts pouring resources into the cure. Well, at that point, when I studied and then afterwards, why would anybody expend resources to measure anything about small business? It seemed to be peripheral, unimportant. Surely when you looked at the solo model, but also when you looked for production, but also when you looked at the Grilkis model, big companies do research and development, big companies hire human capital and invest in human capital. But when the first databases only looked at the largest companies and found out, yeah, they do a lot of R&D, they do a lot of innovation. But I mean, I'll tell you, really, it's a long answer, Alberto, but like you, I'm a professor. So, I remember visiting when I was, again, a student, a PhD student, in Wisconsin, and I'd visit my sister out there where you go a lot, to Palo Alto. And she was somehow, she was unemployed, but she really wasn't unemployed. She worked to make instruction manuals for all of these little startup companies that nobody heard of. And she would bring together teams of people, somebody to take the photographs, somebody to write the text, somebody to interview the CEO of the company to get and all these people were self-employed, and they were all on the verge of being millionaires. And I thought to myself, I thought my sister was unemployed. How did she get so successful? Well, I realized this was a phenomenon, but I hadn't learned about it at Wisconsin. And I realized it wasn't a deficit, a failure of Wisconsin. Nobody was learning about it anyplace. So we set out, strangely enough, in Berlin, but that's another story because that's where we were. But we set out that somebody's got to measure this. We convinced the Small Business Administration in Washington to do a study of the innovation of small firms as well as large firms. And when we start to analyze the data, we found a lot of the large firms were very innovative. I mean, IBM's innovative. General Motors was innovative. They have just millions and millions of research and development investments, dollars invested, and they do a lot of things still to the automobiles. But we also found that there were a number of small businesses, and especially in certain industries, like in software, like in instruments, I remember, where the small firms were really innovative. And so that was the basis for the book, where that's why we didn't call it Innovation in Small Firms. It's not that the large firms don't innovate, but we could see a lot of innovation coming from the small businesses too. That wasn't the end of the story, because then, I appreciate you taking me on this nostalgic, memory of that book. But the way it is in our business, Alberto, and I know Tommaso knows and Andrea knows, as soon as it's a curse, right, of our business. As soon as you do something, you're not satisfied with it. I suppose that was true of your famous Leaning Tower. They built this beautiful tower, and then they found out it leans, right? So it is. And so, we started thinking, well, how is it that the small businesses, small firms can be innovative if they're missing the ingredients? It would be as if we could make your beautiful pasta here in Indiana, or the beautiful polenta that's up in Lombardy, up in Bergamo, without any of the ingredients in Indiana. I mean, I think we think we can do a lot. How can we do that? So we started to think about and develop theories, or really ad hoc explanations. It wasn't just me and Zoltan. It was there were theories like Oliver Williams had said, it's transactions cost. Smaller companies have lower transactions cost because, we know from teaching, if you get one of these big, massive lectures of 500 students, it's much harder to communicate, to get everybody on the same page than a beautiful small seminar like this. A different explanation came from the Nobel Prize winner, was he this year, last year? Paul Milgram and John Roberts, his two Stanford professors, I believe. And they said, no, it's agency cost. It's the cost of, having independent decision makers in a hierarchical bureaucratic organization. They don't do what they're meant to do. They do what they think they should do. And this kind of depletes the goals of the organization. That was a different organization. Other explanations had to do with either labor costs or flexibility. The small firms are more flexible. So anyway, but then we found an answer, or we didn't find it. Paul Romer, another Nobel Prize winner, he didn't apply it to this, but he said generally, well, knowledge is too important and in a way too fluid to just stay where it's created. You know, you in Tuscany and Pisa have your own brand, which I've mentioned a couple. I mean, this beautiful culture. In Las Vegas, they have a different brand. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, Paul Romer's point was what happens with ideas and knowledge in an organization. If it's a company like Apple, or if it's a university, it's too important to stay locked in. It spills over. So his point was knowledge tends to spill over or be externalized. So it means you can use it even if you're not in the organization. And I remember people say, aha, that's how the small firms innovate. They locate because people started to realize, but it depreciates over geographic space because you have to be close to the people who are working on the ideas. You have to talk to them. I mean, yes, I appreciate Pisa and Tuscany from a far distance. I know I'd appreciate it much more if I were there and I could talk to you and talk to people and enjoy the culture. Well, that was kind of the same idea as Paul Romer that said, yeah, you have to be located close to the source of the company or the source of the knowledge, really. Like a fountain, it will spill out, but it won't spill out. It's not quite gravity that localizes it. So this led to the feeling, or the evidence studies, we started to find this, the innovative small firms weren't scattered spatially across geographic distance, but rather they tended to spatially cluster within close geographic proximity to the source. So we'd see these famous innovative clusters like Silicon Valley or around Boston, where there's a lot of knowledge sources, big companies doing R&D, but also universities, because the knowledge spills out of that. And so this kind of started to change the policy recommendations, because I'll finish up in a second because we want to get to Tommaso for sure. But the policy recommendation, in a way, switched from just shrugging your shoulders, or I characterize it provocatively, prayer, to, location. If you locate in a knowledge cluster, these small businesses will get access to the knowledge. They'll be able to innovate. And I thought we'd solve the problem. But you know what? The problem was, it was clear we hadn't solved the problem because it hadn't really solved what Ronald Coase, another Nobel Prize winner, had been awarded the Nobel Prize for explaining why does a firm exist. But we asked, why should a small firm exist? Because the small firm doesn't have the R&D, it doesn't have the human capital, it doesn't have the scale, it has an inherent disadvantage right from the beginning. And our answer came by studying or observing some of the great entrepreneurs, like, for example, Steve Jobs, who, no, he did not come up with all these ideas for the personal computer that's now the laptop or the Macintosh. They were created from research and development human capital of a large, giant corporation, Xerox. And when they created this, you can look this up on Google. If you type in early or original personal computers, you'll see these inventions in Xerox PARC, the research and development facility. The problem was when the scientists and engineers went to their boss and their boss's boss, Xerox made copy machines. I know that Andrea and Alberto remember the copy machine, probably not the young people. So the scientists and engineers went to their boss's boss, said, look, we've got a great thing, whatever they called it, a personal computer. And the boss and bosses said, but we don't make personal computers. Who would want this? We make copy machines. Get back to work and give us something useful. Well, Steve Jobs, he wasn't working at Xerox, but he got wind of this because he was located in the Bay Area, where Xerox Park was, which I believe was Palo Alto or Menlo Park. And he heard about this, and he got wind of it and actually visited Xerox Park. And then what he did, he realized, wow, this is valuable. He didn't steal the idea. They were basically throwing it out in the garbage dump. He took that idea and he then created Apple. The point is, the spillover just didn't fall like manna from heaven, nor did it just happen because Steve Jobs was there. It took somebody to take those ideas and then start a company. And it's not just Apple. I use that example, but if you look at how SAP was started in Baden-Württemberg near Heidelberg, near Mannheim, it was the same story. You had 5 engineers at IBM working. They came up with an idea. IBM didn't think it was valuable. The 5 engineers couldn't find any company that wanted to do it. In the end, they started up SAP. So that's when we started to realize knowledge doesn't just fall like manna from heaven or just kind of blow over from the neighbor. Somebody has to take it out of one context, one organization context, and then start a company. You would see the same thing with Mark Zuckerberg. The organization was Harvard. You see it again and again and again. So that's how we really came to the knowledge spillover theory of entrepreneurship. So I thank you very much.
And David, as you were, I'm first of all so glad I recorded all of this, and I'm very, very pleased you took the time to have this nostalgic view back to when you were a little bit younger, let's say, one of the things that you mentioned, and I really want to emphasize for the students listening, is this correlation, the coexistence, let's say, between innovation happening at the small firms and innovation happening at the large firms. Okay, so your work didn't show with Dr. Axel didn't show that large companies do not innovate, but maybe you might want to elaborate a little bit, to prepare also the floor for Tommaso, that your book is not a story about David versus Goliath. It's more or less the opposite, Okay, so there are ways that David and Goliath can interact, and you gave the example of the entrepreneur, and I'm just curious to understand how you saw these dynamics successfully breeding success. Second aspect that you emphasized, and I want to make sure my students got this, was the work that you started also, among other, with Marianne Feldman on these spillovers of knowledge that careful people, what David is saying, these knowledge spillovers were happening locally, okay? They were happening everywhere, but their impact was much more relevant when it was closer to the center of production of knowledge. Let's go back to what David said at the beginning of the conversation, the inspiration he got from his sister. Is she your older sister?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we're gonna take home the message. Listen to your older sister, because she might have very good career advice for you. So once she showed David the relevance of innovation in SMEs, but also she showed him the relevance of clusters, local clusters, Palo Alto being the place where David's sister was. And of course, as we know, heard what David said, all these people starting their companies prepared to be entrepreneurs. So then, David, this as we build towards policy implication, so David versus Goliath, or David with Goliath. Second, somehow what you called with Marianne, the geography of spillovers, meaning geography means that there are sun belt, rust belts, that there are very nice rainforest, but there are also deserts. So maybe policymakers prefer to be in the sun belt and in the rainforest rather than in the desert. So what can you elaborate on these two topics, and how are they somehow connected with your research?
Well, I really,
Can I add?
yes, please, Tommaso.
Yes, because I had a couple of comments that emphasized Alberto's question. First of all, I might stay here hours because students might not know, but I have grown up as a student, as an academic, reading and studying David's books and papers. So it's an incredible privilege to be here with him and just listen. Let me emphasize a couple of things that are very interesting. To the first matter that Alberto raised, the provocative question is that it's not that David and Goliath truly coexist. One might ask you, what happened to Schumpeter? But you mentioned that over 50 years or so, there was this neglected aspect of innovation and endogenous growth. But actually, we knew that already from early 20th century. So what happened to Schumpeter as to this big versus small? And the second one is, as to the second matter that Alberto has raised, is this knowledge spillover theory. Since these students might be interested also in innovation management and knowing how to help companies assess their innovation potential, whether to what extent is this knowledge spillover theory also as a tool, not just to explain and describe phenomena, but also to understand the big graal of companies that is their competitive advantage. So they two questions that echoes the two made by Alberto, but I could not resist.
Well, no, I appreciate both Alberto's, and I'll answer those, but also Tommaso, you're enriching those questions. And I guess the difference between you and me, Tommaso, is I didn't grow up reading your great papers. That came later. But I did grow up in the country discovered not by you, but by your great countryman, Christopher Columbus. He was Italian, wasn't he?
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
The venture capitalists were Spanish.
Yeah, there you go.
He as an entrepreneur was Italian.
That's what I thought. And but the funny thing is, when he landed, I forget where, someplace in South America on an island, he didn't know what he had. He didn't know what it was. It was this place. He knew that, but it took, by the time I came along, I knew what we had. Well, this is kind of uncovered that's a great thing about our business, the business of ideas. As we kind of discover these new ideas, we don't know what we have. And that was certainly, I think that's always true in the new ideas. We don't know what we have. And it takes a community. What did Hillary Clinton say famously? It takes a village to raise a child, no doubt, but it takes perhaps a city to understand, or it takes a community to understand new ideas. So I do know that our deceased colleague and my friend Stephen Klepper, he used to go to Italy all the time. But what he discovered, he'd look at more history, and he saw, when the automobile industry was started, we think of that as a highly concentrated industry full of dominant firms, not very entrepreneurial. No. What Stephen discovered in its incipiency, I don't know, when was it, in the early 1900s maybe? There were small startups every place. They were doing wild, innovative things, right? Somebody had a car with a sail on it to try to catch the wind. Somebody had an automobile with a smokestack where you put what somebody had it with, you'd be like a bicycle. All of these wild ideas, a very entrepreneurial idea. Then he traces the evolution of the industry and finds out, well, at some point there's a dominant design. It solidifies and it drives out all the companies, all the entrepreneurial startups that don't have that dominant design. And what we end up with is really what we still have today, despite all of the smart automobiles. They still have four wheels. They still have a steering wheel, at least for now, right? So the industry's matured. Now, what that means to Alberto and Tommaso's point is that policy in the early stage of an industry is very different. You've got a different kind of process of creating the knowledge. What kind of knowledge is typically it's going to be not knowledge that firms create themselves. And then there's also going to be a lot of experiments and a lot of failures. That's very different than in a mature industry when the firms are mature, the technologies. Then it's easier to say we can guess, we can not estimate, we can predict which types of technologies, which types of companies are going to take us into the future. Now, Klepper then goes on, not just to look at the auto industry, he looks at lasers, he looks at tires, he looks at penicillin, he does a whole bunch of industries. Shortly after he passed away, about 4 or 5 years ago, Princeton University Press published this book that he'd been working on, and it's something like experimental capitalism. That was the lens he saw by looking at this life cycle. But really, Alberto's point is, and Tommaso's, we've got this mixture of mature industries, mature technologies, and then we've got these new emerging. Which one are better? You need both, clearly in a modern world. It does seem to me, though, in my lifetime, not in Tommaso's, and certainly not in yours, that the balance in the developed countries has pushed our comparative advantage, our competitiveness, to the newer early stage industries. Why is this? Because we learn from our friends and colleagues in international business and international economics. It's not that we don't need steel anymore or ships. Shipbuilding used to be in Bilbao, Spain, and Kiel, Germany, and Europe. Europe still uses ships like North America, but those ships tend to be made in South Korea and other places in Asia. Same thing with the steel. Same thing. I know that in Italy, there's a great battle with the textile makers. Will it get outsourced and offshored to other countries where labor is cheaper, or can they innovate enough and keep the quality high enough to keep it in the expensive country? So my sense is, yes, we always have this mixture, this portfolio, just like people diversify their stock portfolio, of new emerging industries, and then, new emerging industries and mature industries. But I do think one of the surprises of globalization is that the advantage falls more and more to the new emerging industries, which I think explains the great interest, not just in innovation, but in innovation in the key role played by small business.
And this is, David, when I would like to also get my good friend Tommaso involved, asking you, Tommaso, but also David, feel free to jump in. Why this special issue? Why this research? Now, I'm making a jump here of 30 years, my friends. Apologies for that. But why now this special issue on innovative startups and innovative and policy initiative? What drove you, Tommaso, to identify the opportunity, or realize that it was a good moment to come up with this quest that was extremely successful, because the numbers of papers, and the quality of the papers in the special issues are incredible. So it was indeed welcome. But what brought you there?
David, I might start, then I'll pass it on to you.
Fantastic.
And back. We can be
Yeah.
very interactive. Well, honestly, David is clearly the right person to answer this question. I might actually point the problem, and then maybe he can elaborate on that. Actually, if as David just said, early stage industries can really make a difference as to the competitiveness of nations or regions. Well, how do we do it? How can we do it? Can we do it? And actually, here comes a problem: is that most entrepreneurship policies, a good deal of entrepreneurship policies, actually come from a labor market perspective. They had as an objective function to pursue, as a mission to pursue, mostly an economic development, job creation. The Kaufman Foundation, and I'm really happy to share with your students later on a video that assesses the impact of new firms as to the net job creation in the US and around the world. That was a basic pillar. So if our policies to support entrepreneurship are intended to actually, first of all, support economic development and job creation, is that also guaranteeing that these firms actually unleash their innovation potential? And then, hence, we came up with this problem of these possible dichotomy between innovation policies and entrepreneurship policies, or policies for entrepreneurship for job creation, and policies for entrepreneurship as a mechanism for innovation strategies at country level. I don't know if, David, you want to elaborate a little bit more on this, and then I'll tell a couple of things we've learned out of this journey that we made.
Oh, I think you just Tommaso, you just put your finger right on it, that policy was not really focused on the innovation capacity. Now, we know that in the subsequent 30 years that Alberto's talking about, more and more, it started, again, with another Italian in some ways. I mentioned him before. He was president of Italy, and who was that president of the EU?
Romano Prodi.
Oh, yeah, okay, forget. Romano Prodi is also a professor and in Bologna, and he had a famous speech about 2002 where he said, Europe's future lies in its capacity to become the knowledge leader in the world. That made sense because we all knew Grillikis's production model of innovation. If you wanted innovation, you need knowledge and human capital. Then he said, but also we need to become leaders of entrepreneurship. So he could recognize, of course, he's an academic, he's a professor, and Tommaso and Alberto know, we professors always know first, right? And the policymakers later. So I think really since that time, then there was the Europe Council of Lisbon, where they really endorsed Prodi's strategy. And this is kind of diffused over time so that more and more, I say places, but it could be cities, provinces, entire countries realize exactly what Tommaso said. It's not just having people start a business, but it's an innovative business in the right kind of industry that matters. We see that in the smart specialization strategy of Europe to some degree. But there's one element that Tommaso left out about why I appreciate Alberto. I'm very proud of the special issue. Why did it come out so good? Well, Tommaso says why it was important to do it. Why did it come out so good? And that makes me reflect to also kind of historical, when Michael Jackson, I don't even know if the young people know who Michael Jackson was, but he went into, yeah, Alberto does, I can see him smile. When he went into the studio with a bunch of new songs, and the record company, I can't explain that at all, what's a record? The record company said, nice songs, Michael, these look good, but we've got to make sure that they're really good, excellent. So we're going to have you work with Quincy Jones, this famous jazz musician, producer, and out came Thriller, which used to be at least the best-selling album of all time. Well, I'm just going to say this. We had some great authors in that special issue, but the team of editors, Tommaso, Alessandra, Luca, this great team, they were basically the Quincy Jones that turned this into excellent research and scholarship.
David, I'll hang a poster of the Jackson 5 in my office just to remind us.
And we'll put your photo in it.
Can I add a point out of what we learned of this journey? Because actually, this was really a journey. It was really that we have questions that we. So actually, what we learned is that there can be bad public policies. Scott Shane in 2009 came out with this provocative paper, why encouraging more people to become entrepreneur might be a bad thing, or actually, I think he said is a bad thing. But so what we learned is actually policies to really be, we scrutinize about 40 policies around the world. And policies promoting innovative startups, not just startups, but innovative startups. So I think the overall what we learned was, first of all, it takes time. It takes time to really prompt innovation through entrepreneurship in a country. So that is. Second, it has to be made by policies that are articulated and comprehensive and interrelated. In fact, I was struck, but you know what? Beyond the you might thought, especially student, that to support innovation and entrepreneurship, you need to inject money. Well, that's been done by these policies. But actually, what struck me is that there were a number of non-financial aspects included in these policies, and actually, which actually were those making the difference. For example, what was the category that was most surprising, recurrent in most of these policies? I don't know, you might be the guess. It's immigration. Immigration, since because there's knowledge flows is so important. You would never think that immigration and immigration ministry would have a voice. You have, especially in Europe, we tend to think that immigration and immigration policies deal with problems more than everything. Well, it was interesting to find that actually in these 40 policies that we have scrutinized around the world, US, Argentina, Italy, actually in many cases there were immigration measures and immigration ministry involved into that. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, and it's an example of what it takes as a comprehensive policies. And the last one is that with so many policies around the world, this made a natural experiment for us to study the phenomenon of innovative entrepreneurship. So we took advantage of many countries where simultaneously governments were promoting this. So it was possible to move some steps in the comparative aspect of these policies.
Tell us something, Tommaso, and then of course giving back the floor to David when you speak about what were the main failure stories? What were the most typical mistakes? You said it was not all about money. It takes time. Did you observe this, observing best practice? No, you said that there are also bad innovation policies. We want to know more about what it takes to make a bad innovation policy. So what would you point to the European Innovation Council as examples not to follow?
I think it builds on what Tommaso said, which in a way is it's the way he characterized it very carefully. It's actually the way we think of it as innovation policy or entrepreneurship policy makes it seem like it's a single strategy, maybe a single instrument. But if you heard Tommaso very carefully, he said, no, where success comes from, he said, is integration. It's a pervasive strategy. And I often think that's because we hit on the wrong label. Because it's when we started, we thought, oh, we could keep society the same. You know, I know it's different in Portugal than it is in Sweden, and society's different in Poland than it is in Canada. But there's still, you know, societies, they could stay the same. And with this one instrument, we'd see the innovative performance increase. But if you listen to Tommaso, he says the major insight is it doesn't work that way. It actually takes a plethora, a broad spectrum, a entire approach. So I think a better label would be policy for the innovative economy or policies for the entrepreneurial economy, which means this is the driving force. And then he gives the great example of immigration. I think that's exactly right. I know when I was working in Jena, Germany, in Thuringen, the state of Thuringen, the land of Thuringen, back in the early part of the century, and it's a kind of a poor agricultural, the struggling province. The biggest cities is about 100,000. And one time we were at a Max Planck Institute, and one time the minister of the state of Thuringen came to visit us, and she goes, well, you're all researchers of innovation and entrepreneurship. Why do we would like your advice what we should do to ignite innovation in Thuringen? And so my smart colleagues said, oh, well, invest in startups and invest in the university to try to get spinouts and invest in R&D. And I remember Frau Dagmar Szapinski, she says, we tried that, it didn't work. And I think that's a problem when you have like one or two or three instruments and then you impose them on some context, it's not likely to work. There's a bigger societal change that has to happen. Looking around my Zoom at these young people, I can see it's happening, not just over Italy. It's pervasive. But that's, I think, for me, is the learning. It's not a single instrument that's going to change a company or a region or a country from being not very innovative to being highly innovative.
It is also a story about, one of the things that I heard from your answer was, first of all, it's a portfolio. Something that is a bad policy is a policy that flies solo, and also something that, you know, it's taken out of context when studies on Silicon Valley came about, you know, in the 90s. It was all about how do you create the Silicon Valley, the next Silicon Valley. Now that question is a little bit outdated, but it was a little bit, you know, the idea of the 90s of how do you create the next Silicon Valley, and probably that's another recipe for disaster.
Alberto,
we talked a lot. Tommaso, I'm going to give you back the floor. I just want to make sure that we emphasize something that is very nicely present in going through the special issue that you identify as a framework in your introduction, which gives a complete picture of, you know, the startups from the beginning, the entrepreneurial effort, the combination of resources, and the scaling. I'm very specifically interested, Tommaso, if I may, go back to you and then feel free to elaborate on the scaling dimension of policy, because that was an aspect that we touched in class this year a lot. Okay, yes, the entrepreneurial drive, the connection, the technology transfer, but also the scaling aspect of the strategy of startups. Can you tell us anything about the collection of papers on this particular dimension that you identify as one of the dimensions in the framework, in the summary framework of your paper?
What about it? What about scaling?
Well, to make an exact example, I will go back to the couple of papers in the special issue.
Please do. Please do.
What I think is very interesting, since you were asking before, you were curious about failure. I don't know if we can stop the recording. No, probably we done it, but actually there are two types of failure that I think we've learned about. The first one has to do with the mismatch that we were saying before. I don't know if this can be referred to as a failure, because actually this is the case where some colleagues did the Germany case, and I don't really know to what extent was the policy innovation oriented. But funny thing is that when these scholars made a very sophisticated analysis to assess the impact of unemployment subsidies on innovation into a large subset of German startups. And what they interestingly found is that actually those individuals that were subsidized happened to create startups that were less innovative, or that obtain fewer, lower innovation performance than a control group of non-subsidized entrepreneurs. Meaning that if you take the subsidy, job unemployment subsidies as a mean to prompt entrepreneurship, and hope that through that you will obtain magically some innovation out of this entrepreneurial turmoil that you are fostering, well, you might be disappointed. And this is exactly an example of what we were saying before, that the two policies might not be aligned, and actually having one to obtain the other might actually bring unsatisfaction. And the other one, and we then come to the point that you raised, come with the other learning of what should not be done, is the lack of clarity. We noticed that there is a huge heterogeneity in what countries refer to as an innovative startups, as innovative entrepreneurship. And so we came up with with a taxonomy of 4 types of. And it's interesting because none of them can work alone. But countries and policymakers should realize that actually it's a process that should be followed. And those are fostering innovative startups, looking at where innovative startups come from. So looking at pushing and putting money into the places and the context that are fertile in innovative startups, and actually classify innovative startups to the extent that these startups come from such context, belong to such context. However, next stage is actually to define, isolate, and support innovative startups in terms of the traits, the characteristics, the resources that they have, like teams, like resources, patents. Then you should not stop here. You should also look at, and this comes to the scale up point, you should actually also have measures that promote innovative startups to the extent that these firms engage in certain specific behavior. And here comes this scale-up issue. Of course, there are infrastructural elements like venture capital, ecosystems, but actually it's the decision-making that really matters here, that should be under scrutiny. And here, my personal, we had a huge discussion about this with David in Bergamo. You probably remember, Alessandra was also there. By large, most important factors to this third stage is culture. We need to have culture at individual level, at aggregate level. We need entrepreneurial culture. And the last one is actually to have a complete system to assess and support entrepreneurship, innovative entrepreneurship. We also need outcomes. We need measures. Innovative entrepreneurship also must be recognized in terms of the impact that they have in technological and non-technological terms. And here I know that I share with Andrea some comments about the the very issue of sustainability. It's very impressive how many countries are actually now looking at sustainability dimension and impact to actually define the very concept of innovative startup. Innovative startups are not just tech-based new ventures, are those that are really able to create impact in the society.
And with that, let me, considering this a topic of very urgent interest, research interest for Andrea Piccaluga, I'd love to ask Andrea if you want to comment and add your 5 cents here.
Well, I certainly like and I'm certainly interested in what Tommaso just said, no, about startups, not only in the sustainability field from an environmental point of view, but also startups who want to change the world, no? Okay, and with a social impact and so on. So this is certainly a topic which I think is extremely relevant. But to be honest, Alberto, I was thinking a different thing, no? And let me say the other thing I was thinking, no? And it is that I was really fascinated by David's reconstruction of so many decades, no, of economy, of industrial development, of innovation processes, and I really liked these, let's say, retrospective, no, which seems simple, no, if you listen to him, but it really took a lot of scholarly work, no, to define in such a clear way. But my question is the following, dear David. Isn't it that we are still looking at all this with a sort of a West-centric perspective? Because you mentioned Detroit, you mentioned Silicon Valley, and Alberto, Tommaso, and myself, we always mention industrial districts and the evolution of industrial districts, and we like those so much and so on, no? But everyone says that the world is moving eastwards, no? And with regard to large firms, small firms, isn't it that something in Asia is emerging, that the new economic system they have in countries like China, Singapore, Vietnam, which are very different from each other, are representing something which is really in discontinuity with our way of thinking, and maybe we are not giving enough importance to what is happening a bit eastern from here, no? Alberto often visits those places. You probably do as well. But is the new thing really coming from them or not?
Boy, what a great question, Andrea. And I think for the young people, this is their future. I mean, they're the ones with the future, right? And yes, I look back in the past. That's the retrospective. Of course, the answer is the trouble with the future is it's uncertain. But we know this. Certainly, I think that the great insights have very often been drawn by looking to other places and other examples. I know that way back in the early 1800s, and it actually has to do with small business, a great French philosopher, de Tocqueville, wanted to see the startup, not Microsoft, but the United States, sailed over and wrote this very famous book. And this is a great quote. What impresses me isn't the magnitude of the great undertakings, but the multitude of the small ones, small business. But the point is, he was an outsider. I know that it's funny for me, the industrial districts were invented or discovered not by Beccattini and people who'd spent their lives, but Michael Peoria and Charles Sable, when they, were outsiders, came over. And I think we see this again and again. So I think, we're all outsiders. What it says, I don't know your answer, but I think that the answer is going to be, it starts by paying attention and taking it very seriously. That's really your message. Look to these other models, other ways of doing things. You know, if you get back to, I love how Tommaso at the end of his answer kind of weaves it into, but the thing that matters the most is the culture. Well, the culture's kind of, I mean, we're not experts on culture. You may all live in the most cultured place in the world, but I know you're not experts. You know, we're in business and economics, but culture in some ways is endogenous. And even what Tommaso said, that the emergence of an entrepreneurial, innovative culture is endogenous once there's a need. Well, there may be cultures over in Asia, in China, and also institutions and policies. They might not work with our culture now. Maybe we need to change culture. But of course, I'm a victim of my age, unlike, you know, you two gentlemen. And I think, nah, I've seen this before. And you'll remember back in the early 1960s, there was a great Italian economist, author. I think he was in Rome, and he was looking at the large company. Do you remember who I mean? It's been bothering me.
Which years, David?
It would have been in the early 60s. He was one of the great scholars. I tried to look for him on Google. I couldn't, they don't go back that far or something.
Pasquale Saraceno?
Yeah. Possibly that was him.
Saraceno.
Yeah. And, you know, at that point, the West was very fearful that the Soviet Union had a model of innovation, really, or production that was going to take the West. And that, in a way, triggered the Cold War, triggered the, you know, the space race and so on. And, you know, now we look back and realize, no, we couldn't see the limitations of the command and control economy. There was that kind of similar fears about Japan that you surely remember in the late 80s. And we all started sending our students. And the only difference for Alberto, I guess, was when rather than go to Japan, now he goes to China, right? But it's not that those, I think that as those models are their success, it's not that they're temporary, they too evolve. So on the one hand, I think it's your basic point is right. It's essential that we look at what they do to not to appreciate the past, but to figure out how to move forward. Because your point is history doesn't stop. But the truth is, I don't know. And we've seen when we don't know something very well and we think it's better, yeah, it turns out it might not be. But yeah, your point's very well taken.
All right. Well, the main recommendation here is to take a look at the special issue on research policy. There are many students connected. Most of you have your senior paper well designed and defined, but those of you still hunting for great ideas, you will definitely find inspiration in this collection of papers, very up to date, and so look it up. And those the PhD students connected, so something that work on innovation management and innovation policy is a must read. I wonder if there are questions. Last questions. I want to leave the floor open to people following us from home. If there are curiosities and questions, feel free to jump in. Domande? No domande? Zero domande? Zero questions, really? Allora, if there are no questions, it means that they are already digging into the special issue as we speak. And this is good news. This is good news. And I was very thrilled to have Tommaso and David, and also Luca just left, but he was here and for this conversation. It's always a pleasure to have this opportunity, and we had many bad things happening in this month, but one of those good ideas that came out was this innovation restart chats that might continue also when things go back to normal. Who knows? Just as a reminder before we depart, so the next meeting with IRC is with my friend Henry Chesbro next. When is it? Next. When is the? I'm looking. So 6 p.m. on the 19th, Wednesday the 19th. One of us was in charge to take note and prepare the summary for everyone benefits to this lecture. You know who you are. I think it was, I don't know if it was Luigi for this, but we don't need to bore David and Tommaso with these technical details. Thank you indeed, Tommaso and David, for your generosity, for your time. And Andrea, thank you for joining us. All of you have a nice evening, and see you next week.
Thank you, Alberto. Great questions. You inspired us a lot. And thank you all. Thanks, David, and the co-authors, the co-editor. It was a great journey.
Mille grazie.
Grazie a tutti.
Bye.
Grazie a tutti.
Grazie.
I will
Thank you.
switch off the
Thank you,
recording now. So if you want to say things that were not supposed to say during the recording, you can do it now. Eccoci. End.